My daughter-in-law smiled sweetly as she delivered the crushing blow. We only invited people who truly matter to us. After 5 years of emptying my savings account for them, I discovered I did not matter at all. Those words would ignite a fire that burned through lies, exposed greed, and ultimately set me free. My name is Dorothy Chen. I am 68 years old, a retired nurse, and a widow who spent most of her adult life caring for others. When my husband Robert passed away 4 years ago, he left me with a comfortable retirement fund and one precious thing: our son Michael. I believed that supporting Michael and his wife Sarah was my way of honoring Robert's memory and keeping our family together. For 5 long years I became their personal bank. Rent payments, car insurance, credit card debt, medical bills, vacation funds, furniture, electronics, clothing, groceries, and countless emergencies that always seemed to arise just when my monthly pension arrived. I calculated it once and nearly fainted. Over $42,000 had flowed from my retirement account into their lives. I told myself it was an investment in love. They told me it was just what family does. But when the most important celebration of my son's life happened, I was not even informed until it was over. I stood in my bedroom holding the elegant navy dress I had purchased for their wedding and realized that no amount of money could buy me a place in their hearts. The betrayal became the catalyst. What followed was a war fought in banks, living rooms, courthouses, and ultimately in my own soul. This is my story of manipulation, awakening, and the fierce battle to reclaim my dignity. It begins with a simple phone call that shattered my world. It was a Tuesday morning in October when I dialed Michael's number, excited to discuss final preparations for the wedding. The ceremony was supposed to be in 3 weeks, and I had already bought my outfit, arranged for flowers, and set aside $2,000 as their wedding gift. Sarah answered the phone with a tone I had never heard before. "Oh, Dorothy," she said with artificial sweetness, "we got married last weekend in Vegas. It was so spontaneous and romantic. We only invited people who truly matter to us." The words hit me like a physical blow. People who truly matter. After 5 years of sacrificing my financial security, after skipping meals so they could eat at expensive restaurants, after choosing generic groceries so they could buy organic, I was not someone who mattered. That evening, I discovered their wedding photos on social media. Sarah wore a stunning white gown that cost $1,500. I knew the price because I had given her that exact amount just 6 weeks earlier when she claimed she needed it for a dental emergency. Michael looked handsome in his tuxedo, surrounded by Sarah's family and friends. Her parents beamed with pride. Her sister held a champagne glass high in celebration. Cousins, aunts, uncles, college friends. Everyone was there. Everyone except the woman who had funded their life for 5 years. The navy dress still hung in my closet with tags attached. The matching shoes sat unworn in their box. The wedding gift envelope remained sealed in my desk drawer, never to be opened by the people who had deemed me unworthy of their special day. I did not cry that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table and began to write. If money was the only language they understood, then I would speak fluently in numbers. What I discovered shocked even me. I pulled out 5 years' worth of bank statements and began the painful process of adding up every transfer, every check, every emergency loan that was never repaid. The numbers told a story I had refused to see while I was living it. Monthly rent assistance. $600 every month for 60 months. That was $36,000 gone from my retirement fund. Grocery allowances. $250 monthly to keep their refrigerator stocked with organic food while I ate canned soup. Another $15,000 over 5 years. Car payments when Michael lost his job. $400 monthly for 18 months. $7,200. Sarah's student loan payments when she decided to quit her teaching job. $300 monthly for 2 years. Another $7,200. Medical emergencies that always seemed to coincide with their desire for vacations. $3,000 for Sarah's anxiety treatment, $2,000 for Michael's back injury, $1,500 for dental work that apparently never happened. Christmas presents, birthday gifts, anniversary celebrations, furniture for their apartment, electronics, clothing, vacation funds. The list seemed endless. When I finished calculating, the total stared back at me from the page. $42,300. $42,000 from the retirement fund my husband and I had carefully built over 30 years of marriage. Money that was supposed to ensure my security and dignity in my golden years had instead funded the comfortable lifestyle of two healthy adults who were perfectly capable of supporting themselves. I sat back in my chair and stared at that number until my eyes blurred. For 5 years, I had convinced myself I was being a loving mother and mother-in-law. But looking at the mathematics of it, I saw the truth. I had been financing their dreams while abandoning my own. I had been paying for the privilege of being taken for granted. 3 days after discovering their secret wedding, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. Sarah's voice was panicked and demanding. "Dorothy, we need $1,500 immediately. The landlord is threatening eviction if we do not pay rent by noon today. You forgot to make this month's transfer." I had not forgotten. For the first time in 5 years, I had deliberately chosen not to send money. But Sarah spoke as if my financial support was not generosity but obligation, as if I existed solely to solve their problems. "Sarah," I said quietly, testing my own strength, "I only help people who truly matter." The silence that followed was deafening. I could hear her breathing, could almost see her calculating how to manipulate me back into compliance. "Dorothy, what are you talking about? You know we love you. You are like a mother to me." The same sweet voice she used when asking for money for clothes, for restaurants, for weekend trips. For 5 years, I had melted every time she called me like a mother. But mothers get invited to their children's weddings. "If I mattered to you," I continued, surprised by the steadiness in my voice, "I would have been standing beside you when you promised to love each other forever. Instead, I learned about your marriage from a phone call where you told me I do not matter." Sarah's tone shifted from panic to anger. "You are being ridiculous and petty. This is not about the wedding. We needed privacy for our special moment. You are making this all about you when we are facing homelessness." But I was finally making it about me. For 5 years it had been about everyone except me. I hung up the phone and walked to my bedroom, where the navy dress still hung with its tags. I touched the fabric and made a decision that would change everything. The money stops today. The next morning, I dressed carefully and drove to First National Bank, where I had been a customer for 23 years. Mrs. Patterson, the branch manager, greeted me warmly. She had processed hundreds of transfers to Michael and Sarah over the years and had watched my savings account shrink month after month. "Mrs. Chen," she said with genuine concern, "what can I help you with today?" I took a deep breath and spoke words that felt like breaking chains. "I want to cancel every automatic transfer to my son's account. I want to remove his name from my accounts entirely. And I need to set up additional security so that no one can access my money without my explicit permission." Mrs. Patterson raised her eyebrows but asked no probing questions. Instead, she walked me through new passwords, security codes, and a complete freeze on external access. When she handed me the paperwork, she paused and looked me directly in the eyes. "Mrs. Chen, I hope you do not mind me saying this, but I have been concerned about the frequency of these transfers. I am glad to see you taking control of your finances." Her words validated what I had been afraid to acknowledge. Even strangers had noticed that I was being financially exploited. As I left the bank, my phone buzzed continuously. Michael's name appeared again and again, followed by Sarah's increasingly frantic calls. I turned off my phone and drove home in silence. For the first time in 5 years, the money in my account belonged to me alone. When I arrived home that afternoon, I found Michael's car in my driveway and Sarah pacing on my front porch like a caged animal. They had come to collect what they believed was owed to them. But I was no longer the same woman who had been writing checks out of guilt and loneliness. "Mom, what is going on?" Michael demanded as I unlocked my front door. His face was flushed with anger and panic. "The bank called and said you closed our access. There has to be some mistake." I looked at my son, really looked at him, and saw a stranger. This was not the little boy who used to help me bake cookies or the teenager who wrote me thank you notes for birthday gifts. This was a grown man who had learned to see me as a financial resource rather than a human being. "There is no mistake," I said calmly. I have decided to stop funding your lifestyle. Sarah pushed past Michael and grabbed my arm. Dorothy, you cannot do this to us. We have rent due, car payments, credit cards. You know we depend on you. The word depend hit me like a revelation. They were not grateful for my help. They were dependent on it. I had created this monster by enabling it for 5 years. You depend on me, I repeated slowly. 2 healthy adults in their 30s depend on a 68-year-old widow. Do you see how wrong that sounds? Michael's voice turned cold and calculating. Mom, you're not thinking clearly. Maybe we should talk to Dr. Harrison about getting you some help. This behavior is not like you. The threat was barely veiled. If I did not resume funding their life, they would question my mental competency. It was a classic manipulation tactic, and I recognized it immediately from my years as a nurse. I had seen family members use the same strategy to control elderly patients. My thinking is clearer than it has been in years, I replied firmly. And both of you need to leave my house right now. Sarah's mask finally dropped completely. You bitter old woman. We only married in Vegas because we could not afford the wedding you promised to pay for. We were trying to save you money, and this is how you repay us. The lies rolled off her tongue so easily that I wondered how many times she had practiced them. But I was no longer the woman who could be manipulated by guilt and false affection. I never promised to pay for your wedding. I offered to contribute because I thought I was part of your family. Now I know I was just your bank. They left that evening, but not before Michael delivered a parting threat that chilled me to the bone. Mom, if you do not come to your senses soon, we might have to take legal action to protect you from yourself. We love you too much to let you make these kinds of mistakes. Legal action. The words haunted me as I locked my door and checked the windows. They were not going to accept the end of their free ride quietly. I needed to prepare for war. The next morning, I called my friend Margaret from church, who had mentioned her experience with elder law attorneys when her own brother tried to steal her inheritance. She gave me the name of David Rodriguez, a lawyer who specialized in protecting seniors from financial abuse. Mr. Rodriguez's office was warm and professional, filled with testimonials from grateful clients who had won similar battles. After I explained my situation, he leaned back in his chair and nodded grimly. Mrs. Chen, what you have described is textbook elder financial abuse. It is more common than most people realize, and it often comes from the people we trust most. He outlined a clear plan of action. First, we would document everything. Every transfer, every request for money, every text message or voicemail where they demanded financial support. Second, we would gather evidence of my mental competency through medical evaluations and cognitive testing. Third, we would prepare for the possibility that they might try to have me declared incompetent in order to gain control of my finances. The most important thing, he said seriously, is that you have taken action while you are clearly competent and able to make your own decisions. The courts will see that this was a rational choice, not the result of mental decline. That afternoon, I visited Dr. Harrison for a complete physical and mental health evaluation. After 30 years as my physician, he was shocked to learn about my family's financial manipulation. Dorothy, you are one of the most mentally sharp patients I have. Your decision to protect your assets shows wisdom, not confusion. I also made an appointment with Dr. Susan Walsh, a geriatric psychiatrist who specialized in competency evaluations. She spent 2 hours with me, conducting memory tests, reasoning exercises, and psychological assessments. Her conclusion was unambiguous. I was fully competent and capable of making my own financial decisions. Armed with medical documentation and legal support, I felt stronger than I had in years. But I knew Michael and Sarah would not give up easily. They had lived comfortably off my money for too long to walk away without a fight. For 2 weeks after our confrontation, Michael and Sarah tried different tactics to restore their access to my money. First came the guilt. Sarah left tearful voicemails about how much she loved and missed me, how sorry she was about the wedding misunderstanding, and how much they needed my support during this difficult time. When guilt failed, they tried fear. Michael called to warn me about financial scams targeting elderly people, suggesting that someone might be manipulating me into making poor decisions. He offered to help manage my money to protect me from predators. The same man who had been the predator for 5 years. Next came the isolation campaign. They called my friends and neighbors, expressing concern about my mental state and asking people to check on me. Mrs. Johnson from next door knocked on my door with a worried expression. "Dorothy, dear, Michael called and said you have been acting strangely. He is worried about your decision-making." I invited Mrs. Johnson in for coffee and told her the whole story. Her expression shifted from concern to outrage as I explained how much money I had given them and how I had been excluded from their wedding. "Dorothy," she said firmly, "you are not acting strangely. You are acting like a woman who has finally had enough." But not everyone was so understanding. My sister Linda called from Arizona after receiving a concerned phone call from Sarah. "Dorothy, I think you might be making a mistake. Family is family, and Michael is your only child. Maybe you should reconsider this money situation." The pressure was coming from all directions, exactly as Mr. Rodriguez had predicted. But I held firm, supported by my medical documentation and legal team. I knew that backing down now would mean returning to 5 more years of financial exploitation. 3 weeks after I cut off their funding, there was a knock on my door at 8 in the morning. Through the peephole, I saw a professional-looking woman with a clipboard and an official badge. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. "Mrs. Chen, my name is Patricia Williams. I am a social worker with Adult Protective Services. We received a report that you might be in a vulnerable situation, and I need to conduct a wellness check." Michael and Sarah had escalated their campaign by involving the government. They had reported me as a vulnerable adult who was being financially manipulated or suffering from mental decline. It was a clever strategy because it forced me to prove my competency rather than requiring them to prove their claims. "May I see your identification?" I asked through the door. She showed me an official badge and identification card. Reluctantly, I let her inside, but before she could begin her questions, I made a phone call that would save my life. "I want my attorney present for any conversation about my mental state or financial decisions," I told her. Ms. Williams seemed surprised by my preparedness, but she agreed to wait for Mr. Rodriguez to arrive. Within 30 minutes, my lawyer sat beside me as Ms. Williams began her investigation. She asked about my daily routine, my social connections, my financial management, and my recent decisions. Mr. Rodriguez calmly presented the medical evaluations, cognitive tests, and documentation we had prepared. "What you see here," he explained, "is not decline but clarity. Mrs. Chen made a rational decision to stop financially supporting adults who were exploiting her generosity. The timing coincided with their wedding, where she was excluded despite funding their lifestyle for 5 years. Ms. Williams reviewed the documents carefully, then closed her folder. "Mrs. Chen, I see no evidence that you are vulnerable or incompetent. The concerns raised appear to be financially motivated rather than based on legitimate welfare issues. I will be closing this case with no further action required." When she left, I felt both relief and anger. Relief that the investigation was over, but anger that my own son had tried to use government services to force me back into compliance. The loving family I had imagined did not exist and perhaps never had. Just when I thought the worst was over, Mr. Rodriguez called with devastating news. Michael and Sarah had filed a petition in probate court asking for guardianship over my person and estate. They were claiming that I was mentally incompetent and needed a guardian to protect me from making poor financial decisions. "This is serious, Mrs. Chen," he explained during an emergency meeting. "If they succeed, they would have complete control over your finances, your medical decisions, and even where you live. We need to prepare for the fight of your life." The petition painted me as a confused and vulnerable elderly woman who was being manipulated by unscrupulous people. It claimed that my sudden decision to cut off financial support was evidence of mental decline and that I needed protection from my own poor judgment. They had assembled 3 witnesses to support their case: Sarah herself, my neighbor Mr. Peterson, and surprisingly, Dr. Harrison's receptionist, who apparently told them I seemed agitated during my last appointment. They twisted every interaction into evidence of incompetency. Mr. Rodriguez and I began preparing our defense immediately. We gathered statements from friends who could attest to my mental sharpness, financial records showing the extent of their exploitation, and medical evaluations proving my competency. We also hired Dr. Walsh to serve as an expert witness about my mental state. The key, Mr. Rodriguez explained, is to show the court that your decision was rational and well considered, not the result of confusion or manipulation. We need to prove that stopping their financial support was the act of a competent person protecting herself from abuse. The hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to prepare for a battle that would determine whether I retained control over my own life or became a legal prisoner of the people who had been financially abusing me. During the weeks leading up to the hearing, I discovered just how many people had noticed my situation over the years. Margaret from church wrote a statement describing how I had frequently mentioned my financial support for Michael and Sarah, and how I had seemed increasingly stressed about money in recent months. My hairdresser, Janet, provided a letter detailing conversations where I had expressed concerns about my son's financial dependence. Even my mailman, Carlos, wrote a brief note confirming that he had delivered numerous certified mail notices about overdue bills addressed to Michael and Sarah at my house. The most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source. Dr. Harrison's nurse, Rebecca, approached me after a routine appointment and asked if she could help with my legal case. It turned out that she had been present during my conversation with the receptionist and could testify that I had been calm and coherent, not agitated as they claimed. "Mrs. Chen," she said earnestly, "I have worked with elderly patients for 15 years, and I know the difference between confusion and clarity. You were asking intelligent questions about your health and making rational decisions about your care. Anyone who claims otherwise is lying." We also uncovered evidence of Michael and Sarah's lifestyle during the years I was supporting them. Credit card statements showed expensive restaurant meals, designer clothing purchases, and luxury vacations, all funded by my monthly transfers while they claimed to be struggling financially. Perhaps most damaging to their case was a series of text messages Sarah had sent to her sister, complaining about having to butter up the old lady to keep the money flowing. The messages, obtained through Sarah's sister who was disgusted by their behavior, revealed their true feelings about me and their calculated manipulation. The morning of the hearing, I dressed in my best black suit and carried myself with all the dignity I could summon. Judge Patricia Santos presided over guardianship cases and had a reputation for thorough investigation and fair decisions. Still, my hands trembled as I sat beside Mr. Rodriguez at the defendant table. Across the courtroom, Michael wore a suit I recognized, one I had bought him for a job interview 2 years earlier. Sarah sat beside him in a dress that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. To them, this was just another manipulation to restore their income stream. To me, it was a fight for my fundamental freedom. Their attorney, Mr. Hamilton, opened with a sympathetic portrayal of concerned children trying to protect their beloved mother from her own declining mental state. He painted my decision to cut off financial support as sudden, irrational, and evidence of cognitive impairment. Sarah testified first, dabbing her eyes with tissues as she described how much she loved me and how concerned she had become about my recent behavior. "Dorothy has always been like a mother to me," she said with practiced emotion. "But lately she has become suspicious, angry, and confused. We just want to help her." Mr. Rodriguez's cross-examination was devastating. "Mrs. Cole, when was the last time you called Mrs. Chen without asking for money?" Sarah struggled to answer. "Is it true that you told Mrs. Chen she was not important enough to attend your wedding?" Sarah's face flushed with embarrassment as she tried to explain. "How much money has Mrs. Chen given you over the past 5 years?" He continued relentlessly. Sarah claimed she did not know the exact amount, but when presented with bank records showing over $42,000 in transfers, she had no choice but to acknowledge the figure. Michael's testimony was equally damaging to their case. Under questioning, he admitted that he had not visited me regularly unless he needed money, that he had never offered to repay any of the loans, and that he had threatened legal action when I cut off funding. "Mr. Chen," Mr. Rodriguez asked pointedly, "if your mother was truly suffering from mental decline, why did you wait until she stopped giving you money to seek guardianship?" Michael had no good answer. Our case began with Dr. Walsh, the geriatric psychiatrist who had evaluated me. She testified that my cognitive function was well above average for my age group, and that my decision to stop financial transfers showed clear reasoning and good judgment. Mrs. Chen demonstrated excellent memory, logical thinking, and appropriate emotional responses during extensive testing, Dr. Walsh explained. Her decision to protect her financial assets after years of exploitation is evidence of mental clarity, not confusion. Dr. Harrison testified about my physical and mental health, confirming that I had no signs of dementia, depression, or other conditions that would impair my judgment. He also revealed that he had been concerned about the financial stress I seemed to be experiencing in recent years. Rebecca, Dr. Harrison's nurse, testified about my behavior during medical appointments, describing me as alert, cooperative, and fully capable of making informed decisions about my health care. She directly contradicted the receptionist's claim that I had seemed agitated or confused. My friends from church, neighbors, and even my hairdresser provided testimony about my mental sharpness, social engagement, and rational decision-making. The picture that emerged was of a competent woman who had finally recognized and stopped a pattern of financial abuse. Mr. Rodriguez presented the financial records, showing the systematic drain on my retirement funds and the luxurious lifestyle Michael and Sarah had maintained at my expense. He also presented the text messages between Sarah and her sister, revealing their true attitudes and manipulative intentions. Finally, it was my turn to speak. I had practiced this moment for weeks, but my voice still trembled slightly as I stood to address the court. Judge Santos looked at me with patient attention as I began to tell my story. Your Honor, I am not confused or incompetent. I am a woman who spent 5 years believing that love could be purchased with money. I gave my son and daughter-in-law over $42,000 from my retirement savings because I thought it would make them love me and include me in their lives. I described the years of financial requests, the constant emergencies, the promises to repay that were never kept. I talked about skipping meals so I could send them grocery money, about choosing generic products so they could buy organic food, about sacrificing my own comfort for their convenience. The moment that changed everything, I continued, was when Sarah told me I was not important enough to attend their wedding, a wedding that I had partially funded. That was when I realized that no amount of money would ever make me matter to them. They did not see me as a mother or mother-in-law. They saw me as an ATM. I looked directly at Michael as I spoke, hoping to see some flicker of recognition or remorse. But his face remained cold and calculating, focused only on regaining access to my money. Stopping their financial support was not the act of a confused woman, I concluded. It was the act of a woman who finally understood her worth and refused to be exploited any longer. I am not mentally incompetent. I am mentally clear for the first time in 5 years. Judge Santos nodded thoughtfully as I returned to my seat. The courtroom was silent except for the sound of Sarah quietly crying. Whether from genuine emotion or continued manipulation, I could no longer tell. After a brief recess, Judge Santos returned with her decision. The courtroom was tense as she reviewed her notes and looked at both sides of the case. My future hung in the balance. Would I retain control of my life, or become a legal ward of the people who had been exploiting me? This court has carefully considered the evidence and testimony presented by both parties. She began formally. The petition for guardianship alleges that Mrs. Chen lacks the mental capacity to manage her financial affairs and requires protection from exploitation. My heart pounded as she continued. However, the evidence presented shows exactly the opposite. Mrs. Chen demonstrated remarkable clarity in recognizing a pattern of financial abuse and taking appropriate steps to protect herself. Her decision to cease financial support was rational, well-considered, and long overdue. Judge Santos looked directly at Michael and Sarah as she delivered the most important words. The petition for guardianship is denied. Mrs. Chen is fully competent to manage her own affairs. Furthermore, this court finds that the petition appears to have been filed not out of genuine concern for Mrs. Chen welfare, but out of financial motivation. Relief flooded through me like a warm wave. I had won. My freedom was secure. But Judge Santos was not finished. This court is deeply troubled by the evidence of financial exploitation presented today. Mrs. Chen, you have every right to determine how your money is spent, and you should never feel obligated to support adult children who are capable of supporting themselves. The gavel struck, and it felt like chains falling away. Michael and Sarah gathered their papers with barely concealed fury. As they prepared to leave, Michael finally looked at me with something that might have been regret, but it was too little and far too late. In the weeks following the court victory, I made decisions that would have seemed impossible just months earlier. I put my house on the market and began looking for a smaller, more manageable apartment in a senior-friendly community downtown. The house held too many memories of financial manipulation and false promises. With the proceeds from the house sale, I did something I had never imagined possible. I kept enough for my own comfortable retirement and donated $25,000 to the Elder Rights Legal Clinic that had helped me prepare my case. I wanted other seniors to have access to the legal protection I had been fortunate enough to afford. I also joined a support group for people who had experienced financial abuse from family members. To my surprise, I discovered that my story was far from unique. Many elderly parents had found themselves funding adult children who showed love only when money was involved. Margaret from church introduced me to a widows' social group that met twice weekly for activities ranging from book clubs to travel planning. For the first time in years, I had friends who valued my company rather than my bank account. I learned through neighborhood gossip that Michael and Sarah had been forced to downsize to a much smaller apartment, and that Sarah had finally gotten a job after years of unemployment. Perhaps they would learn the value of honest work and financial independence, though I no longer waited for that growth to happen. Looking back on this experience, I can identify the warning signs I missed for so long. The constant financial emergencies that always coincided with my pension deposits. The promises to repay money that were never kept. The way they only contacted me when they needed something. The guilt and manipulation whenever I expressed any hesitation about giving them money. Most importantly, I learned that love should never require payment. Real family relationships are built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and genuine affection, not financial transactions. Money can enable relationships, but it cannot create or sustain them. I also discovered that setting boundaries is not cruelty. It is self-preservation. For years, I confused enabling with loving, thinking that saying no to their requests would damage our relationship. But a relationship based solely on financial support was already damaged beyond repair. The legal battle taught me the importance of documentation and professional support. Without medical evaluations proving my competency and financial records showing the extent of their exploitation, I might have lost control of my own life. Anyone facing similar manipulation should gather evidence and seek legal counsel immediately. Perhaps most importantly, I learned that it is never too late to reclaim your dignity. At 68 years old, I had assumed my life was set in its patterns. But by fighting for my financial freedom, I discovered reserves of strength I never knew I possessed. If you are reading this story and seeing parallels to your own life, please know that you are not alone and you are not powerless. Financial abuse of elderly people is more common than most people realize, and it often comes from the people we trust most, our own children and grandchildren. The warning signs are clear once you know what to look for. Constant requests for money, emotional manipulation when you hesitate to give, promises to repay that are never kept, exclusion from important family events despite your financial contributions, and threats to question your mental competency if you resist their demands. If you recognize these patterns, take action immediately. Document every financial transaction, every request for money, every promise that was broken. Seek medical evaluation to establish your mental competency. Consult with an elder rights attorney who can help you protect your assets and your freedom. Most importantly, remember that you have the right to say no. You have the right to keep your hard-earned money for your own needs and comfort. You have the right to be treated with respect and dignity regardless of your financial contributions to others. Your worth as a human being is not measured by your willingness to fund other people's lifestyles. You deserve love and respect that is freely given, not purchased with monthly payments. Today, I live in a comfortable apartment with a view of the city park. I have enough money to cover my expenses, enjoy occasional luxuries, and feel secure about my future. The financial stress that plagued me for 5 years is gone, replaced by a sense of control and peace. I volunteer at the Elder Rights Legal Clinic, sharing my story with other seniors who are facing similar situations. It is both heartbreaking and empowering to help other people recognize manipulation and find the courage to protect themselves. My relationship with Michael and Sarah is over, and I have made peace with that reality. I grieve for the son I thought I had and the family relationships I hoped we could build. But I refuse to grieve for money that was stolen from my retirement through guilt and manipulation. The navy dress still hangs in my closet, but now it serves a different purpose. Instead of representing exclusion and betrayal, it reminds me of the moment when I finally understood my worth. Sometimes I look at it and remember the woman who was so desperate for love that she confused payment with affection. I am not that woman anymore. I am Dorothy Chen, a competent, independent woman who refuses to be exploited. I am someone who matters not because of what I can give others but because of who I am. My story ends not with reconciliation or forgiveness, but with freedom and self-respect. Sometimes the greatest victory is not changing other people but changing ourselves. Sometimes the most loving thing we can do is to stop enabling destruction and start demanding dignity. If my words have resonated with you, please share this story with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment about your own experiences with financial manipulation or family boundary setting. Subscribe to support content that empowers people to protect themselves from exploitation. Together, we can remind each other that love should never come with a price tag, and that our worth is not determined by our willingness to be used by others. Freedom and dignity are not for sale, and they are never too expensive to reclaim. The most important lesson I learned is this: it is better to be alone with your dignity intact than surrounded by people who only value your bank account. True family will love you whether you have money or not. Everyone else is just a customer looking for a discount on your self-respect. 6 months after the court victory, I received an unexpected phone call that would show me just how far the ripples of my decision had spread. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar but warm. "Mrs. Chen, my name is Rebecca Martinez. I got your number from the Elder Rights Legal Clinic. I heard about your case and wanted to thank you." Rebecca explained that she was a social worker who had been struggling with a similar situation involving her elderly father and her brother financial manipulation. "Your story gave me the courage to help my father set boundaries," she continued. "He was giving my brother thousands of dollars every month while living on crackers and canned soup. When I told him about your case, something clicked. He finally understood that love should not require bankruptcy." Rebecca's father had successfully cut off financial support to his manipulative son and was now living comfortably on his Social Security and savings. The brother had been forced to find steady employment for the first time in years and was slowly learning to support himself. "The most amazing part," Rebecca said with emotion in her voice, "is that once the money stopped, my father discovered which family members actually cared about him. My sister and I visit more often now, not because we need anything but because we enjoy his company. He seems happier and more confident than he has in years." This conversation reminded me of something I had discovered in my own life. When I stopped being the family bank, I found out who my real friends were. The people who continued to call, visit, and include me in activities were those who valued Dorothy the person, not Dorothy the wallet. 3 weeks later, I had an encounter that tested my resolve in ways I had not anticipated. I was grocery shopping when I heard a familiar voice in the produce section. Sarah was talking to someone on her phone, and her words stopped me in my tracks. "I know, Mom, but she completely cut us off. We are barely making rent, and Michael is working 2 jobs just to pay the bills. I had to get a job at the department store, and my feet are killing me every night." Her voice carried a tone of genuine exhaustion that I had never heard before. For a moment, I felt the old familiar tug of sympathy. The woman who had once lived comfortably on my retirement savings was now working retail and struggling to pay basic bills. Part of me wanted to approach her to offer help, to return to the familiar pattern of solving their problems with money. But then I remembered the wedding I was not invited to, the words about only inviting people who mattered, and the legal battle they had put me through to try to control my finances. I remembered Dr. Walsh's words during my competency evaluation. True healing sometimes requires letting people experience the consequences of their choices. I quietly finished my shopping and left without confronting Sarah. As I drove home, I realized that my lack of intervention was not cruelty but wisdom. They were finally learning lessons about responsibility, work, and financial management that my years of enabling had prevented them from learning. That fall, I started a new tradition that brought me more joy than any family dinner had in years. I began hosting monthly gatherings for other seniors who had experienced various forms of family financial abuse. We called ourselves the Dignity Defense Club, and our meetings combined social support with practical education about protecting assets and recognizing manipulation. Our group grew from 4 original members to over 20 regular attendees. We shared stories, resources, legal contacts, and most importantly, we reminded each other that we were worthy of respect regardless of our bank account balances. Some members had been exploited by children, others by grandchildren, siblings, or even caregivers. Margaret from church became my co-host for these gatherings, and we discovered that helping others heal from financial abuse was deeply therapeutic for our own recovery. Each story we heard reinforced the importance of the boundaries we had set and the battles we had fought. One particularly memorable meeting featured a presentation by Dr. Walsh about the psychological dynamics of elder financial abuse. She explained how manipulators often use a combination of guilt, fear, and artificial affection to maintain control over their victims' resources. The most insidious part, she told our group, is that the abuse is disguised as family obligation or love. Victims often blame themselves for being suspicious or ungrateful, rather than recognizing the manipulation for what it is. Her words resonated deeply with everyone present. Almost a year after the court case, I found an envelope in my mailbox with Michael's handwriting on it. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, unsure whether it would contain an apology, another manipulation attempt, or legal documents. The letter was 3 pages long and began with words I had waited years to hear. "Mom, I owe you an apology." Michael went on to describe the past months of financial struggle, his realization of how much money he had taken from me over the years, and his growing understanding of how wrong their treatment of me had been. "Sarah and I have been going to counseling," he wrote, "both individually and together. My therapist helped me see that I had been treating you like a bank rather than a mother. I convinced myself that asking for money was normal family behavior, but I now understand it was exploitation." He described getting a second job to pay their bills, Sarah's adjustment to working full-time, and their efforts to build a budget and live within their means. "For the first time in years, we are supporting ourselves completely. It is hard, but it feels honest in a way that depending on your money never did." The letter continued with acknowledgments of specific ways they had manipulated and mistreated me. "The wedding was the worst thing we did. We told ourselves we wanted privacy, but the truth is we were ashamed that we could not afford the celebration we wanted. Instead of being grateful for your support, we excluded you and then made it seem like it was your fault." Michael also addressed the guardianship case with what seemed like genuine remorse. "Filing that petition was cruel and desperate. We were so panicked about losing the money that we convinced ourselves you were the problem rather than facing our own financial dependence. I am ashamed that we tried to take away your freedom just to keep funding our lifestyle." The letter ended with a request that surprised me. "I am not asking you to resume financial support. I am not even asking you to forgive me right away. I just want you to know that I finally understand what we did wrong, and I am committed to becoming the son you deserve to have all along." I read Michael's letter several times over the following weeks, sharing it with my support group and discussing it with a counselor I had started seeing to process my own healing. The consensus was cautious optimism tempered with healthy skepticism. "Actions speak louder than words," Margaret reminded me during one of our coffee meetings. "If he is truly changing, you will see it in his behavior over time, not just in a letter." Dr. Walsh, whom I now saw monthly for maintenance counseling, helped me understand that forgiveness could be a process rather than a single decision. You can acknowledge his apology and appreciate his apparent growth without immediately returning to a close relationship. Rebuilding trust takes time and consistent evidence of change. I decided to respond to Michael's letter with a brief note acknowledging his apology and expressing cautious hope for his continued growth. I made it clear that any future relationship would need to be built on mutual respect, and that financial support would never again be part of our dynamic. If you want to be part of my life, I wrote, it will need to be because you value me as a person, not because you need something from me. I am willing to consider rebuilding our relationship slowly, but only if your actions consistently match your words. 3 months later, Michael called and asked if he could visit for my birthday. Not to ask for anything, but to bring me a homemade gift and spend time together. It was a small gesture, but it was the first time in years he had offered to give rather than asking to receive. As I reflect on this journey from exploitation to empowerment, I am struck by how many lessons emerged from what initially felt like pure loss and betrayal. The pain of being excluded from Michael's wedding became the catalyst for recognizing years of financial abuse. The shock of their legal attack became the foundation for building an unshakable defense of my rights and dignity. Most importantly, I learned that love cannot be purchased, but self-respect can be reclaimed. The money I gave Michael and Sarah over 5 years bought me nothing but the illusion of family connection. The money I spent on legal fees and security measures bought me something invaluable: my freedom and peace of mind. I often speak to other seniors about the difference between helping and enabling. Helping involves supporting someone through a temporary crisis while they work toward independence. Enabling involves creating a permanent dependence that benefits no one in the long run. I had spent 5 years enabling Michael and Sarah to avoid the growth that comes from facing challenges and supporting themselves. The court victory was important, but the real victory was internal. I stopped seeing myself as someone whose value depended on what I could provide for others. I started seeing myself as someone worthy of respect, consideration, and genuine affection. My story has been shared at senior centers, legal clinics, and family counseling centers throughout the city. Each time I tell it, I meet other people who recognize themselves in my experience. The most common response is relief. Relief that someone else has faced similar manipulation and found a way to fight back successfully. Today, 2 years after that devastating phone call about the secret wedding, I live a life that is authentically mine. My apartment is decorated with things I chose because I like them, not because they might impress visitors who only come when they need money. My calendar is filled with activities that bring me joy rather than obligations that drain my resources. The Dignity Defense Club continues to meet monthly, and we have helped dozens of seniors recognize and escape financial manipulation. We have compiled a resource guide for elder law attorneys, developed a workshop series on financial protection, and created a support network that extends far beyond our original group. I volunteer regularly at the Elder Rights Legal Clinic, where my case has become a teaching example for other attorneys handling guardianship challenges. The documentation methods we developed and the defense strategies we employed have been refined and shared with legal professionals throughout the state. Perhaps most rewarding, I have received letters from adult children who heard my story and recognized their own exploitative behavior toward elderly parents. Several have written to thank me for helping them understand how their constant financial requests were damaging their relationships and hurting their parents. One particularly moving letter came from a woman whose mother had shared my story with her. I realized that I had been seeing my mother as an ATM rather than a person, she wrote. Your story helped me understand that asking for money every month was not normal family behavior but financial abuse. I have apologized to my mother and committed to rebuilding our relationship on respect rather than financial support. As I finish writing this account of my journey from exploitation to empowerment, I am aware that healing is an ongoing process rather than a destination. There are still moments when I question my decisions, when I wonder if I was too harsh or unforgiving. But those moments pass quickly, replaced by the solid knowledge that I did what was necessary to protect my dignity and freedom. The relationship with Michael remains fragile and limited, built slowly on evidence of genuine change rather than promises or manipulative expressions of love. Sarah and I have had no direct contact since the court case, and I am content with that arrangement. Not all relationships can or should be salvaged, and some boundaries need to remain permanent. I have learned to distinguish between loneliness and solitude. Loneliness is the ache of wanting connection with people who do not truly see or value you. Solitude is the peace of being comfortable in your own company and selective about who you allow into your space. I spent 5 years lonely despite constant contact with Michael and Sarah. Now I experience solitude as a form of self-care and protection. The money I saved by ending their financial support has allowed me to create the retirement I had always planned but never thought I could afford. I travel modestly but regularly, pursue hobbies that bring me satisfaction, and maintain my health through good nutrition and medical care. The financial stress that once kept me awake at night has been replaced by security and peace of mind. Most importantly, I have reclaimed my sense of self-worth. For too many years, I measured my value by how much I could do for others, particularly Michael and Sarah. I confused being needed with being loved, and I mistook financial dependence for family connection. Now I understand that my worth exists independent of what I can provide for others. This story is ultimately about more than money. It is about dignity, respect, boundaries, and the courage to fight for your own well-being even when the people you love try to convince you that you are wrong to protect yourself. It is about learning that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable destructive behavior. To anyone who sees themselves in this story, I want you to know that it is never too late to take back control of your life. Age does not make you powerless, and family relationships do not give others the right to exploit your resources or manipulate your emotions. You deserve to be treated with respect and dignity regardless of your willingness to provide financial support. Document everything. Seek professional help. Gather evidence of your competency. Build a support network of people who understand what you are experiencing. Most importantly, remember that you have the right to say no, the right to protect your assets, and the right to expect love that does not come with a price tag. My name is Dorothy Chen, and at 70 years old, I am finally living the life I deserve. A life of dignity, respect, and authentic relationships. The battle was difficult, but freedom is worth fighting for. Your freedom is worth fighting for too.